Do you rest on Sunday? You're like, well, you just don't know what my exam tomorrow is going to be, and so you would not be asking that question. Or how important my research is. I am solving this problem for all humanity. And if you knew the importance of my research, you would not be asking if I am well rested. So I'm not going to ask, but I'm going to let you, where we read today, ask this about your own life. And we are going back to creation in Genesis chapter 2. Now, I also want to clarify what I'm not talking about when I talk about rest. Because here's what we do. When we're tired, when we're frustrated, when we're lonely, when we're overwhelmed, we dream of the dream vacation. We start saving for this vacation where we empty our lives of all responsibility and we go to glorious spaces with delicious food and we relax and do whatever we want. But that is vacating your life. And I believe the Bible teaches us to fully live into our life with good rest and with holy days. Now, I think there is nothing wrong with vacation. But I want to be clear as we go into rest that I'm talking about holidays, about holy days, about restoration, about knowing and remembering what does it mean to be fully human. Fully human with 8.5 hours of sleep every night for like months running. A human who says, that was a good week. Look what I did. Oh, my relationships are a little bit messy, but I'm going to lay down my fussing and fighting for a day. So I put all this up here so that we can be really clear what I'm not talking about. Have you heard about halt B? If you are hungry, if you are angry, if you are lonely, if you are tired, or if you are bored, you're headed for trouble. Now your trouble and my trouble will look very different. My trouble will look confrontational. I will lean in hard about what's wrong and unjust. Others will become passive and who cares? Others will become angry. If you are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, well, if you're hungry, just go ahead and get up. And I believe there's some food out there they have for you. Just go get it. That we can take care of. And the others need to be processed a little bit more. That may suggest, if that's persistent, any of those, that there hasn't been enough rest. And this is an invitation for you to have both the habits and the courage to let you look at why you are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or bored. And so, join me, if you will, in Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So, on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, you and I rest because we get tired. At some point, you realize sitting with an open book or an open screen does not mean anything else is going in. And then we finally decide, well, common sense will have more to do with this exam tomorrow than me looking at the screen. Okay? And we rest because we're tired. But God rested without being tired. God rested to delight and enjoy what God was doing. What is the vast array of your last week? What were you working on? So for me, I was working on understanding vertigo because I had some and I was wanting to get over it. I was working on a 5-minute speech for work on Friday. I was working on how do I help people who are in their first year of the job that I support, but they're like towards the end of that first year. How do I help them keep learning and being curious and not being like, oh, I want that. I was working on how do I help students get their accommodations in exams. Did you know that sometimes it's hard for students to get the accommodations that they're rightfully to have? And so there was this whole justice piece and emails and drama about that. That's a bit of my last week. It didn't touch on my family and my relationships. My dad, I woke up Tuesday morning, he had had a stent put in. And that was like stressful, didn't know what was going to happen. So I was processing, how do I honor my parents from 3,000 kilometers? Those are some of the array of the last week of my life. And none of it, can I say, is completed. And yet, if I rest today with God, where was God in it? So begin to think about your vast array isn't the same as God's creation. It's not an expanding universe, but it's the relationships and the world of influence and responsibility that you have. And God rested after he had said it was all really good. And maybe you're like, well, that's the problem. My work is not really good. What's happening in the lab is not going as I wish. Rest and look. And then see, how can you bless that day of rest? So we're invited into Sabbath as a pattern. Did any of you ever as a kid play Music Freeze? You know, you put on a really danceable song and everybody's dancing and then you have to freeze when the music stops. And what happens? Invariably somebody falls over. Because, y'all know the physics, things in motion, they stay in motion, okay? Guess what? As humans, this is true too. If we are used to a frenetic pace of life, and then all of a sudden, it's the weekend and we're supposed to stop, we're like, oh my gosh, now I have time too. Okay, wait, I've got to get my hair cut, my passport's expired, and I'm supposed to be leaving the country in a month, and I need to go to grocery. Oh, who has to have a grocery store? I can't even find my DoorDash app. And we have this frenzy because we've been frenzied all week. And so our rest becomes frenzies of other activities. And yet we're invited into a pattern of freezing what seems so important. So we can look, we can rest, we can bless, and then we can ease into more thoughtful responses to what's actually important. So just thinking about your own rhythms, when is it in your life where you would never plan a group project meeting? This is the 24 hours where I don't do group projects. This is the 24 hours where I don't go to interviews. This is the 24 hours where I am right, but I don't stand on that principle for those 24 hours. Where in the rhythm? If God set it in the order of creation, one might think it's a good idea. Now, some of you are like more literal thinkers and kind of command-driven. So let's just make sure that we get commanded was this Sabbath thing too. But what's really cool, do you know the Ten Commandments? Twice in the Old Testament. They were in Exodus. So basically it's as they left Egypt. And then 40 years later, after they've been wandering around, in Deuteronomy, right before Moses is getting taken up. I emboldened for you. There's a difference. What is the difference in what they're called to remember? So, in Exodus, they are called to remember that God created in 6 days. So it's a pattern. We're commanded, and it's a pattern. In Deuteronomy, 40 years later, give or take a day, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. We rest because we are no longer enslaved. We rest because we no longer need to self-secure our future. So much of life is trying to make a name for yourself. I get it. You're building your CVs, your future, your ability to get a job, your ability to buy a house someday, your ability to take care of your parents and some future family you might have or that you have currently. Our labor is directly connected to, one, what we hopefully think is valuable, but two, to our ability to provide. And a day of rest says, oh, I cannot secure my future, but the one who can is walking with me. Do you know, we even have a Charter of Rights so that we can keep this protected. So legally we've protected it, but have we protected it in our own lives? Or are we so reaching and trying for the future we believe God's given us, that we can't take a pause to say, where is God in my present? And so, this is just a little pause, but when I empty, when I vacate, I'm just having fun. I am not reflecting. I'm actually quite glad for my grasping and striving and saving, so I got this fun. But what God is saying is you are not a slave. And you can rest with me. Now, the lovely thing is that it's not just a command. There's some blessings that go with it. If we had time, we would go through all of the prophets. I chose 2 if-thens. Now, do you know what else is important about a rest day? Is that in the rest day, there is a ceasing and stopping of exploitation. Because guess what? If I'm striving and I'm grasping and running after this certain future, who else has got to? Somebody's probably doing it with me or for me. And so, in Isaiah, they were, I hope later you'll read all of Isaiah 58. It's like one of my favorites. And it's all about this. Man, y'all quit your complaining to God. Because you know what they were complaining? God, we're like keeping these fast days and these festivals, and we're honoring you every Sunday, and you're just ignoring us. They were kind of mad at God. And he's like, well, when you quit abusing people and enslaving people and trying to make your own money on your day off, then if you'll keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath, if on my Sabbath you stop doing as you please, then you're going to find the joy of the Lord. We want the triumph, but we forget the if clause. So the grammarian in me says you need to understand causality. If and then. If you want to feast on the inheritance that God has intended for you, then keep that Sabbath. So not only are we called. Now, Jeremiah 17, I'm going to suggest that you go ahead and read that on your own. I am putting a blessing in there, but there's also some negative if-thens. Okay? So what's happening in both Isaiah and Jeremiah? They're written about 200 years apart. In both instances, the city of Jerusalem is about to be taken over. And y'all are like, I don't need ancient history. I can barely remember what happened yesterday because we studied. Here is the point, is that they were about to be conquered because they had been abusing people and exploiting people. And God had said enough in both times. In Isaiah, it's happening in the north, and in Jeremiah's time, it's happening in the south. And so what Jeremiah, or God through Jeremiah, is saying is that if you are careful to obey, this was the whole chapter is about the Sabbath, and what's happening is the gates were open, and everybody was coming in to do their business because they needed to make some money, and they wanted to be the first ones in for the week, so they were coming in on the Sabbath. But if they had kept the Sabbath and they weren't working on it, then the kings of David will come. And you're like, man, that means the rule and reign of just leader. The rule and reign ultimately of Christ himself. The city would be inhabited forever, and the people will come to worship and thank God. There is a ripple effect to a Sabbath to people. And one of the things I realized is that I'm an introvert, so I think about rest as being me. But when we think of Sabbath rest, it is always communal. Even God was resting with God's self. And when we rest, there's a community aspect both in benefit, in connection, and in expression. So you may need to think about rest in terms of God's patterns and rhythms. You might benefit, maybe you're a command kind of person, or causality. But Hebrews 4 gives us another reason. It actually invites us, and I'm just going to read from here, verses 8 through 11. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. Now, the thing to know, I want us to focus on verse 11, is make every effort to enter that rest. Now, isn't that counterintuitive? Why should I have to be exerting effort for rest? Why are y'all tired today? Because your goals for excellence in studies and excellence at work, or for fun with your friends, or for a meaningful relationship has left you exhausted. And there's something about making every effort. That word can also be diligent or study. Do any of you actually study rest? To become a student of rest suggests it's not as straightforward as we think. And if it's not straightforward, it means we probably are going to grow. I'm just going to say, as I'm looking around, one of the older people in this room, I still haven't learned all there is about diligence and rest. I have been disciplining my life into this rhythm for a long time. And yet, I can find myself maybe not disobedient, but struggling. Now, I also want you just to notice in verse 7, a hardness of heart starts to happen when we don't enter God's rest. It seems more and more foolish to get exactly what we need. It is so counter to what is expected at work, what is expected to get ahead, what is expected by your peers, sometimes by our families. I can remember one time when I was working really hard on rest. And also if you have children, some of you are parents, you're like, well, I don't get to send them to grandma's every Sunday. And I'm still parenting, and they're still loud and crazy. They still need to be fed. I could go a whole day without eating just to avoid the kitchen, but I have some responsibilities here. And so we find rest within the midst of that. But maybe we lay down being the perfect parent for that day, or the best student, or the finest partner. And we just lay it down, and we just are. So that we can have hearts that are not hardened the rest of the week. And so we can enter into that rest. Now, okay, you see my little fake magazine page from Canva? Thank you very much. Here's what you want to do. The truth is that every magazine that's at least designed towards women my age has got something about how to have the best day with your friends, relax and relate. They have all these cutesy things, okay? So you want some practical things. Maybe you're like, okay, I know I'm supposed to, but like, what do I actually do? Well, one thing is that the Hebrew day went from sunset to sunset. So when you mark out on your rhythm with the Lord, where is your Sabbath? Think sunset to sunset, which means you get a really long one in the winter in Vancouver. But with sunset to sunset, what it does mean is that you are preparing for what we think of as tomorrow, the night before. How many of us have missed beginning of worship because we were just so tired? But how tired I am Sunday morning is directly correlated to what I did Saturday night. Now, there is no judgment in that. There's just some truth in that. All right? So guess what, y'all? If I tell you how early I go to bed, you're going to be like, are you a granny? I'm not. But here's what happens, is that I have to wake up for work at 5:30 in the morning. Because if I want to get to work on time, I go with one of my kids. I need to be out of the washroom by 6 so that she can have it on time for us to both walk out the door just after 7. Okay? So I have to know, if I'm getting up at 5:30, guess what? I can't be staying up till midnight. Well, I could, but I wouldn't get much work done and I might lose my job because I'm quite bare if I'm sleep deprived. So we have to think, if this is the boundary of life, I have to think about the night before. So marking sunset to sunset is about your physical rest. It's also about your emotional rest. Now, as you wind down, guess what? You're like, but oh my gosh, I'm almost finished. And if I just keep working a little bit, or if I just wake up in the morning, first thing, I have the direction of this paper and I'm getting it done. Leave yourself a note. Your subconscious will make a better writing than if you try to push it through. And I do this at work on Fridays. What is it that needs to happen? And I leave it as a sticky on my desk for the next day, or Monday. I do this on my work at home desk. I have other projects. So if you're so worried you're not going to find where you are, leave yourself a note so you know where to resume. And it closes the loop so your brain can put that task to bed. It may take practice. Sometimes my brain doesn't put the task to bed, but it's a strategy. All right, your errands. Start dividing your errands over 6 days. I know as a parent that there's only you've got this one 30-minute window to get your kid into swimming lessons, or it's 6 more weeks later. Probably won't drown because it took 6 more weeks to get into swimming lessons if it comes on your day off. There's a strategy to saying what must be and what can I let go. Oh, y'all, reach out, look at your phone right now, and put it on Do Not Disturb. And I invite you to leave, see some of y'all are listening. I invite you to leave your phone on Do Not Disturb until sunset. But my phone, you just saw my phone's on because my daddy's in the hospital. So here's for emergencies. I have my family can come through Do Not Disturb. My children and my parents can get me. But Instagram and salespeople and others cannot distract me. And that is a piece that makes it harder. Craig, he puts his phone in his office. You actually can't get him on Saturday, his Sabbath. Cannot get him. And then begin to think, not how do I vacate, but how do I rest my body? How do I rest with the Lord? When you read Hebrews 4 later on your own, we're not going to get to it, but it talks about the word of the Lord is sharper than is like a sword, and it gives us, it shows us what's actually in our heart. So make his word part of your Sabbath, and then within community. Now, thank God. Here is the piece. Rest, true Sabbath rest, will allow you, invite you into a mercy seat where there is grace. This is important. And so we want to acknowledge, I am a human. I am not God. And I need to accept my limits. You know, the lottery teaches us, know your limit and play within it. Guess what? God set up the universe for you to recognize your humanity and that it has a limit. And so live within it. So on this mercy seat, Ark of the Covenant, here's a quick history. The priest would put the annual Yom Kippur sacrifice between where the angels are. And on it would be the blood of the Lamb. And the blood of the Lamb was shed so that the rest of us who weren't in a background where the Ark of the Covenant mattered could enter God's rest, could enter community, could enter relationships, and we could know what it meant to approach God with confidence. If we are resting and we are receiving and giving a blessing, we can then enter into the throne of grace, the presence of God, his mercy seat with ease and confidence. One night of sleep does not make for a term of too little sleep. 1 week of Sabbath rest will not build into your character and your spirit all of the life-givingness that's promised in Sabbath rest. But it starts you to be able to receive that, to be able to receive the grace of your limits, to be able to have the joy of the Lord. And you're like, but I've got bigger goals than what I'm doing right now. Sabbath rest will keep you human as you achieve those. Because what does it profit a man or a woman to gain the whole world, but to lose themselves? Psalm 46:10, the Lord tells us to cease striving and know that I am God. And I fear that the way of being excellent as a student and as an employee and as a provider for family has taught me to strive hard. When I decided something is right or wrong, I'm a dog on a bone. I am relentless. I will send 1,000 emails. I will call every day. Some of that's how God's wired me. And if there were no Sabbath rest, I would be a very bitter, very resentful woman because of trying so hard to pursue so actively what is right and wrong. So, in the music frenzy and there's a freeze? Do you fall over when it's time to stop because you're at such a rapid pace of life that you have lost the ability to sit still, watch, listen, connect, bless, and rest? This week, I hope you'll calendar in the next month of Sabbaths where you can delight in the vast array of creative endeavors that you and the Lord have participated in. You can entrust to Him the unfinished. You can bless those it's hard to bless. And you can reclaim holy days week by week. And you will not just sing about finding rest for your souls. You will be living into the gift that is given to us, where our future and our being is already secure. Let's pray. Lord, we do want to find rest for our souls, but like so many things, we want to do it on our own terms. We are so used to dancing fairly effectively to the rhythm of the life that we've built that we fall over when we live into the rhythm of the life you have given us. But we receive this gift, and we want to learn to walk in your unforced rhythms of grace. We want to keep pace with the Spirit of Jesus, and we want to become diligent students of how to enter your rest and how that can transform who we are, our relationships, and our work. We look to you, Jesus, and we ask that you would help us to truly receive this